Simon O'Connor.
Mr. Speaker, love is in the air. I know, love is in the air. What an announcement today. Look, as most in the House know, Mr. Speaker, I'm actually getting married at the end of the year. Quite excited about that. But I understand there's another union has been announced in Parliament today, a union which is meant to provide a contrast to the budget which we're discussing today. Mr. Speaker, Labor and the Greens are jumping into bed together. Look, as I try to imagine that union in flagrante, I'm struggling a bit. In some ways, I apologise for introducing it to the House. But look, I don't remember Labor and the Greens fighting, but they said they have been, and now they've started to work together. I guess now they can put aside their loopy differences and can focus on the loopy things which they have in common. But look, I, for one, am welcoming the Green-Labor nuptials. I wish them a long, happy marriage full of new taxes, legalised drugs, criminalised sugar, and the abolition of every industry in New Zealand. And, Mr. Speaker, in a very practical sense, it's not actually clear what either party is going to get from this deal, which is a great contrast in terms of the budget, where I think New Zealanders are very clear what they're getting from that. Mr. Speaker, with these nuptials, the Greens have been promised nothing. Maybe they're happy with that. Maybe they really didn't negotiate a deal for themselves to help Labor in return for nothing. And look, that could be true. They did get left at the altar by Helen Clark in 2005, but, you know, they could fall for that again. As I've been told, love is blind. But if there is more to come out of it, maybe we have to hear more about this. Already there are ructions of noise from the other side, not a good sign in these early stages of going steady. But really, to the Labor side, what are they going to see from this? Cabinet posts? Surely Andrew Little wouldn't be selling his Labor colleagues down the river just for a shot at the PM's office. The real question is, what do they get out of this deal? Does my colleague who just spoke, is Stefan Brownie going to become the new Minister for Primary Industries? And really, is Catherine Delahunty, at the expense of my Labor colleagues, going to become the Minister of Foreign Affairs? Look, Mr. Speaker, we've heard today directly from the Leader of the Opposition's mouth that this will not be a monogamous relationship. He admits that the Greens are going to get screwed again. Labor and the Greens, indeed, are going to take us back to 2005. But look, I do hope that Labor and the Greens have signed a prenuptial agreement, because I think it's going to be a very messy divorce. And that ultimately, Mr. Speaker, is a huge contrast to what we have seen and heard in a budget speech last week from a government which is unified and which is focused and is heading down the right path, bringing along, if you will, the people of New Zealand, strongly wedded, to continue the puns, to a government in the polls, because it is delivering. Look, in my own area, I just want to turn to Tamaki. I think there's an enormous amount of good news there. Obviously, there's a whole lot of stuff in health, and depending on time, I'll get to it. But we've heard about more funding in housing, and we need only turn our minds, Mr. Speaker, to the likes of the Tamaki redevelopment project. I think an incredibly good project. I'm not going to pull a colleague from the other side of the House into it, just in case he gets into trouble. But actually a really good initiative, one that's actually been developed over successive governments, but is bearing fruit under this present government. 2,500 houses are going to be turned into 7,500 clean, dry, insulated, warm homes. And just going around Glen Innes in particular at the moment, what a transformation that's already occurring as those new houses popping up. For those of us who have been getting up around Sun Hill recently, a really good example of infrastructure spending that this government is leading. One only need to think of the cycleway that's going from Glen Innes through to Tamaki Drive. Stage 1, Mr. Speaker, almost completed. We've heard from the education side of things that there is more money being pumped into education. This too has been manifest in Tamaki, in my own electorate. When we think of the classrooms that were announced, particularly last year, but we now know there is more money coming, not just, of course, for the likes of Tamaki, it's actually for classrooms and infrastructure across the country, but I, for one, am hopeful that there is support in this budget for more assistance in my electorate, particularly in education. When I go around talking to the various principals and teachers, it's very clear, first and foremost, that they're doing a fantastic job, but also that we have growing roles. In fact, in my electorate and ward, intensification is already happening. By ward, the most housing consents across Auckland, I believe, are actually happening in the Tamaki or the Aoraki ward. So why that impacts on education is actually as the families are moving in, young families in particular, there is that growing pressure on our schools. So I think it's tremendous to have seen in this budget that more money is on the way. When we talk of infrastructure, it would be remiss of me, Mr. Speaker, to not talk about the ultra-fast broadband. Again, if you're travelling down most of the streets of Tamaki at the moment, they've turned a little bit orange, as there are more orange cones that I care to count. And primarily this is for the ultra-fast broadband that's going in. For whatever reason, it hasn't quite reached my house in St Heliers yet. I'm not sure if I'm to take that personally or not, but it's coming, I am told, and particularly to Ethan, who might be looking at home, I'm told it's coming up the road very soon, Ethan. We will get up to a much higher broadband speed, both download and uploads. Hey, look, the other things I quickly want to touch on, because I am conscious of time, is in the health space. I do this first and foremost as a New Zealander, secondly as a Member of Parliament, of course, and as Chair of the Health Committee, but $2.2 billion of new spend into the healthcare sector in this budget. And that is building again on a very strong, if I could continue from a bit earlier, strong relationship the government has had with the health sector, and I think fundamentally understanding the health sector. And I know colleagues of mine, particularly on the National Party side of the Health Committee, are out and about engaging with the communities. My colleague Barbara Kuriger nodding her head. In fact, we just had people from Rahans, the Rural Health Alliance, come and talk to us recently. And so more money being made available to DHBs, and the like, fundamentally important, more money into elective surgeries, and as a number of people are pointing out, more money into the pharmaceutical budget, which I think is immensely important. I think it's useful for the House to note the extra funding that's been announced obviously is for the likes of drugs for metastatic cancer. In the melanoma space, we've heard about the hepatitis C, remarkable drug in that market that not just manages, in fact doesn't manage Hep C, but actually cures it. But there are 5 other drugs as well that are being looked at. So again, a remarkable opportunity there, Mr. Speaker, and a very strong spend, and I think one that will continue to have to be looked at by government. Those who have any interest in the health space will understand that these new biologics or immunotherapies are quite remarkable drugs. And in fact, just thinking quickly and briefly, some of the drugs that are being put forward for the skin cancer of melanoma can also be used for the likes of lung cancer, and very pleased to be talking to some people from the Lung Foundation recently about that. So the whole pharmaceutical increase, the whole pharmaceutical spend is a perfectly good example of a government listening and doing its best to respond to a growing economy, but also being prudent around the spend and understanding there are limits. Look, the other area, and it is to do with health, but it also reaches out into our academic space, is the almost $100 million announced by Ministers Coleman and Joyce around health research funding. I think that's incredibly important as well. I'm very fortunate to have several trustees from the Malligan Institute in my electorate, along with professors, doctors and academics from the University of Auckland who are often chewing my ear on these matters. Amazing what they are developing, be it at the Institute or at the university, but more money provides more opportunity, not only to discover these drugs, but to do so in New Zealand, which I believe has flow-on opportunities there. Look, finally, I just want to quickly touch on the question of homelessness. It's been popping up a little bit here in conversations. I do so primarily as someone who's actually worked with the homeless many, many years ago. In fact, if I could link it to health, I remember clearing out some of the clothes the homeless have left behind, and in doing so found a nice used needle stuck in my thumb. One of those sort of experiences you don't want to repeat. But why I mention is homelessness is something which has been around for a long time in successive governments. And some of the discussions here today seem to suggest it's completely new. It is not, but this government is continuing to address it, and I very much commend this budget to the House.